welcome everybody to tonight's event. Meet the creators of MAHJ-X, the new and innovative way to play American Mahjong. I'm Debbie Barnett, and tonight I'll be hosting the event, during which we will share some insights into the creation of MAHJ-X, and then we're going to dive into each rule individually, their use, strategies. We're going to show a short video and follow it up with Q&A. Now, before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to our panel so you can hear a little bit about their Mahjong journey. And we're going to start with Gladys. Gladys?
Yes, ma'am. 20 or 25 years ago or so, my daughter said to me, "Ma, you got to learn this new game. It's fabulous." I said, "Darling, I was nursing you at the Mahjong table, and I gave it up for bridge." And then fast forward to when my daughter said, "Ma, you really got to learn this," which was around 1999. I met Dorothy and Larry Crams. They were holding Mahjong tournaments throughout the United States at wonderful locations. And they all had like 300, 350 people at their tournaments. And Stacy and I, my daughter who started playing Mahjong, she and I went to the first tournament, found out that we could meet these dear friends, Dorothy and Larry Crams, and we ended up working with them, my husband and I, Phil and I, and conducting the tournaments. And Dorothy got breast cancer, which we ended up having breast cancer as a primary charitable reason for our events. And I took over the tournaments in 2005, subsequently buying the business in 2011 from Larry. The business doubled and tripled. We ended up getting 500 and as many as 600 people at a 3-day event. And then I did many tournaments, for charities all over the country. In the meantime, maybe 10 or 12 big ones, and then the smaller events that I did for churches and synagogues and individual charities. But during my particular journey through the Mahjong world and meeting National Mahjong League president and her sons, part of the foundation for National Mahjong, I started noticing something, that there seemed to have been a built-in luck factor in the game of Mahjong. And that, I think, after having studied it and watched over the shoulders of literally thousands of Mahjong players and studying the card, I discovered things that had changed during the years. Asian Mahjong was a very simple game. It was based on points that you accumulated by playing, by putting together certain forms of hands, 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, of run of 3, 4, 5 numbers, and decided, what's going on? What made this game change? When it seemed to have been a gambling game, how did it change for Americans? And what they did was there were 24 flowers in the original game, and everybody got an additional flower. This in the American game. Everybody got 2 flowers on the deal, which means everybody had wild flowers that they could build their hands with. And that went all the way through until the 60s and 70s, when the National Mahjong League decided to take all the flowers and just make them a suit of 8, and then added jokers, 2 jokers, and 4 jokers, and 6 jokers, and then eventually 8 jokers. And everybody knows Sylvia and Kathy and Barbara are joker magnets. And sure enough, when they were playing in, for instance, we're in Vegas and they're playing the slot machines, they're winning. And they're also collecting more jokers than Dottie and Leslie and Lucy. And so I started delving even deeper into the luck factor and found that so many changes based on how many patterns they had in the hands, of course, how many jokers they picked, and the fact that the National Mahjong League literally limited the amount of hands that you could play and the formats for those hands. that's my journey. And along with that, after finding out the luck, I just started putting together the dreaded luck factor. I started putting together lists of what was more luck involved in this playing of the game. And I came up with a list, and John saw the list, and I posted it in my newsletters, and at every tournament, I would say, this is what I think we ought to change. And of course, nobody was interested in changing anything, because the vision of the old timey player is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Definitely put in a lot of inspiration into the creation of this game. I'm going to move on now to introducing Julie and Philippe. Julie and Philippe, can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Okay, so Philippe and I are the creators of I Love MAHJ, the online game and skill building platform. I'm sure that some of you may be members, or you may have seen Debbie using I Love MAHJ on her Wednesday skill building sessions on YouTube. I've been playing Mahjong for around 12 years, and after many failed attempts, I finally convinced Philippe to learn.
Yeah, I guess I was the reluctant spouse, as you could say. But I wish I had actually taken the plunge. I really enjoyed playing Mahjong, and when I started, I just dove feet first, and then even created our own platform. So when we created the platform, we wanted to make sure it was just not a copycat of others. We wanted to make sure that we could have a place to play, but not only play, but also improve your skills. So that's kind of what we built. We launched in 2020. And we continue to add feature, and I guess it's been taking over our lives.
Yeah, it certainly has. It's definitely kept us really busy, and we've also been writing all kinds of Mahjong related articles. We've been featured on podcasts. We've worked with the lovely ladies over at the Mahjong Line, and we recently ran a workshop at Debbie's fabulous MahjCon event in Florida. So I think it's safe to say that we're now totally immersed in Mahjong, and frankly, we're loving it.
Well, I think I have to agree with you guys. For sure.
It's
Well,
fun.
thank you so much for sharing that. And next up is Mr. John Davis. John, say hello to everybody. I'd love to hear about your journey.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces that are, that like my stuff all the time. I've only been playing for 9 years. My wife and I moved here to Los Angeles from Pittsburgh, and I had never heard of Mahjong, but she learned the game. They at a senior center taught me, and because before I came to Los Angeles, I was a digital photographer and an artist, and I thought it would be interesting to take my photography and blend it with Mahjong. And so, like behind me, you can see some of the artwork. And so I produced some prints and sent them to Gladys. And she said, "Why don't you come and be a vendor at one of my tournaments in Las Vegas?" And then so I was a vendor and also a player. And as things developed, I created MJ Diva magazine, which is an online magazine that some of you belong to. And I did a number of issues to that until about 2 years ago, I had an inspiration to write a Mahjong musical. So I wrote a Mahjong musical called Mahjong Mania. And we got a lot of funding from the Mahjong community in a GoFundMe that enabled us to create some samples and so on. And we're in, as often happens with these kinds of things, you wait forever to get somebody interested in it. So we have now 2 versions. One is a version for the stage, and the other is a version for a cruise ship. And it's a cruise ship like a Follies show. And we're trying to encourage anybody that goes on cruise ships to ask them, would you have a nice Mahjong show for us? That kind of thing. So so I'm always on Facebook, and I'm kept repeatedly seeing Gladys making this point about, the game is so much relying on luck. And when I play, I have the same kind of frustration that everybody does, that people win because they're lucky. but they're also skilled. And so you have to have a certain amount of skill. But then it seemed the question that I raised is the very structure and the way the game is organized, does it favor luck over skill? And so I wanted to investigate that. And so I asked people that I know, Julie and Philippe and Debbie and Gladys and a few other people, could we have a conversation about this rule of luck and what could we do to change that kind of thing? And over a year and a half, I guess, we came up with this game that you're going to see tonight, MAHJ-X.
Excellent, excellent.
Debbie?
Yes, okay. Great. Thank you so much. All right, and I'd like to introduce myself. Most of you already know me, but here's a little taster for those that don't. I started teaching Mahjong in 2006. I own and operate the only online school of its kind, the School of American Mahjong, which opened in 2019. That same year, I published a book, Unlocking the Secrets of American Mahjong. I also run online events and in-person events, such as tournaments, workshops, and the big event, MAHJ-Con, taking place in October. And recently, my husband, Randy, had this genius idea for us to develop Mahjpedia, an app filled with rules, strategies, fun facts, and more. And now, well, it goes without saying, I am thrilled to be a part of the exciting new MAHJ-X. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, so I actually have a couple of questions that I did want to pose to the panel before we dive in to showing some videos about the rules. So if you've already answered it, maybe expound on it just a tad bit more. Gladys, you did mention about the luck factor, and for years you've been openly discussing how this traditional game is slanted more toward luck than skill. Do you think MAHJ-X solves this problem? And if so, why?
Okay, I think that this is doing a lot to answer all of those issues, as well as several other issues to impact the game so that it is more exciting, more strategic, more challenging, and certainly the old timers, they reach a certain level and they think, what else is there? And the newcomers are saying, but wait a second, is there something else I can do? Is there something more I can do to this game, with this game? And as it sits before MAHJ-X came along, not really much. It is what it is. And then if you start reading, and which Debbie and the team are going to be doing shortly, you start reading suggestions on the changes to the rules and the reasons why, you are going to see your game and your ability to play it blossom. It's going to be, it's not just new, it's old and new.
Right.
That's about it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Gladys. And yeah, we're going to be excited to share all this with you in just a little bit. Now, John, you did mention a bit when you were talking in the beginning, if there's anything more that you want to share about how the discussions began that led to the creation of MAHJ-X, feel free to fill in any more that you didn't already.
Well, so I had a long list of people that I knew from having done the magazine and the show and being on Facebook all the time, that I considered people who had the knowledge and experience to really seriously think about this. And so some people had to turn it down because they were too busy. But I did get some suckers, and we started having Zoom meetings, regularly. And they were really fascinating discussions, because the discussions centered around, if we make this change, is it going to be more strategic of a game? Does it give the players more tools to make better decisions rather than just be blindsided with luck? And so that was always the issue. And the other issue is that the changes that we made had to work together to create the game, because we didn't want a game that was just a list of house rules stuck together, that anybody could do and then give it a name. So it had to have that kind of cohesion. And we think it does. And we're going to rely on you as you play it to give us feedback and tell us what's working and what isn't.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, John. Okay, Julie, how does MAHJ-X differ from the traditional version?
Okay, well, there are quite a few differences. So it's probably best if I give you a high-level response here, and then we can dig into the detail as we continue our discussion this evening.
Sounds perfect.
Okay. So as Gladys and John have said, our vision for MAHJ-X was to address the luck factor so that we could reduce player frustration brought on by elements of the game that were outside of a player's control and enhance the enjoyment of the game. And we also wanted to ensure that we were challenging our brains throughout the entire game, which is one of the main reasons why we all play. So at its very core, MAHJ-X is based on National Mahjong League rules, except with some interesting twists and turns. And as John said, the new rules complement one another, and the true power of MAHJ-X really becomes evident when players begin using the rules in combination. So we'll be discussing all the rules in detail as this evening progresses, but this is just a taster. So I guess I'll just give you a few little things. So a MAHJ-X game starts with players having 13 tiles, and one of which is a joker. And East then will pick their 14th tile once the Charleston has been completed. So everybody is on an even playing field at the very beginning of the game. And then there's the Charleston that's a little bit different to the traditional version of the game. And there are additional strategies to consider, which include, for example, the extended role of jokers and the ability to amend exposures. So basically, players are kept on their toes throughout the entire game. So although the core of MAHJ-X is the National Mahjong League game, players also have lots of unique features to explore when they play with these new rules. And there's one other thing that I just wanted to add in, and that's that MAHJ-X is an alternative to the traditional National Mahjong League game, and we're certainly not trying to impose it on anyone. We know that many players hold the traditional game very dear to their hearts, and we do too, and we'll definitely continue to play the traditional version. However, MAHJ-X just offers that little bit of extra variety in a similar way that Siamese and Royale have done. It's kind of fresh and invigorating and just adds a whole new layer of challenge and fun for those who are interested. Hopefully that gives a little bit of background there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julie. All right, Philippe, I have a question for you because this has been a big question. Probably one of the most popular of all questions. What about an online version of MAHJ-X? Will that happen? From a technical standpoint and a coding standpoint, can you explain what would go into getting this version up and running?
Yeah, so we appreciate everybody's interest in having an online version. It is quite a lot of work though, because there are a lot of rule changes, and we're going to go through them in a minute. But and for us, it's not just a question of programming the system to enforce those rules, but we also have to teach the bots strategies to take advantage of those rules. From like choosing hands, playing the Charleston, switching hands, figuring out what other players would be playing defensively. So there's a lot of things. Everything has to change the way they play. And it'd be easier if our bots were kind of basing just stuff. The problem is what makes it harder is that we have 3 levels of intelligent bots, from beginner to advanced. So we have to basically come up with strategies that are suitable for a beginner MAHJ-X player all the way to an advanced MAHJ-X player. And teach them to the bot. The problem is, like, since it's so new, we're kind of in uncharted territory as to what constitutes an advanced MAHJ-X strategy. So yeah, the bot's going to be a big challenge for us, and then we have to adapt the exercise in the exercise room, the statistics, the hand suggestions. And we have to test it, of course, to make sure that we don't break the existing game. So it is, it sounds like simple to say, well, just put it online, but it's actually quite a lot of work. And it's just the two of us, and we're already working 7 days a week. So it's going to be maybe a bit of a challenge to get it up there. The other thing also that I want to mention is that as people start trying MAHJ-X, they'll send feedback, and based on that feedback, the rules are likely to evolve. And so when they do, if we code it, then we have to recode it based on the changes, retest everything. So we're a little cautious about starting too soon until things stabilize. But speaking of trying out the rules, Debbie, I think you have done quite a bit of testing, and so maybe you can share what those testing sessions were like and what feedback you received so far.
Yeah, well, I was so excited to be able to have some testing of MAHJ-X, and the feedback was incredible. I really expected, I don't know what I was expecting, but I was pleasantly surprised at the incredible feedback. Everybody loved the new elements, and they loved the fact that there were fresh challenges. I think one of the there were a few big hits. One was starting out with a joker. Everybody loved that. They just said, what a great feeling to at least be able to start out with one joker. So there's not going to be any more evenings or days or weeks seeing no jokers. So that was definitely a big hit. The other thing was the Charleston changes, and those you're going to see soon. Those were things that can be implemented right away. And when I say that, not that everything can't be implemented right away, but in one session, you're not going to experience every single one of the rules. It's going to take multiple sessions in order for that to happen. But the Charleston is one of the ones that you can really dive into doing rather quickly. And, I have some thoughts about ways of being able to do future tests with maybe helping people feel a little more comfortable diving into the rules a little bit more. But so far, the feedback's been great. I have people waiting to have another play date, so I'm setting that up locally in the villages as we speak. Excited to do that. And I just want to say their input greatly helped us refine the rules. So those test sessions were very welcomed. All right, before we dive in, I know everybody's excited about hearing and getting into the nitty-gritty of everything. But before we dive in, I just want to remind everybody, and I do see that a question did come in already, which is great. If you have, we're going to show a short video, and then we're going to talk a little bit about that rule, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So you have a chance to do it rule by rule. So that'll be a lot less confusing and complicated. So if you do have a question, put it in the Zoom chat. So take your time now to find your Zoom chat window if you're not familiar with it. And for those watching from YouTube, they already know the drill. They're pros at putting their questions and comments in chat. So I'll be keeping an eye on both the Zoom chat window and YouTube. And that way, I hope to get to everybody. I think we also might have had some questions even come in through email, because we had asked for feedback through email. And I think I even have some of those. We'll see how much we get to throughout the evening here. All right, so let's see. We're going to go ahead and start. We'll start with the very first rule, and that is starting out with the 13 tiles, and everybody starting out with a joker. Okay, so this is the first rule we're going to be talking about, starting with 13 tiles and a joker.
For some time now, the Mahjong community has been considering the element of luck in the game we love. Luck is something that players have absolutely no control over, and yet it impacts the outcome of the game. I'm sure we've all experienced luck not being on our side and the frustration this can lead to. So, a group of experienced Mahjong enthusiasts came together to mull this over and to see if they could solve this issue. The aim was to find fun and innovative ways to play American Mahjong that are less dependent on luck and, therefore, more skill-based with increased strategic possibilities. We'd like to share some very exciting news. The group believes they have solved this Mahjong conundrum and are offering a brand new version of American Mahjong to the community. This alternative to the main National Mahjong League game is called MAHJ-X, and we believe it will appeal to those players who are open to trying something new and who enjoy a challenge. This video will provide an introduction to MAHJ-X, highlighting some of the new and innovative rules and the rationale for each. For more details, check out the MAHJ-X website or Facebook group. First, everyone gets a joker at the beginning. The rationale is that when each player starts with a joker, it removes some of the luck factor and opens up more possibilities for each player. This is important considering the extended role of the joker in MAHJ-X. We'll discuss this more later. The second rule change is that all players start with 13 tiles. The idea is that starting with 13 tiles removes the majority of East's advantage.
That is the first one. This is the time we're going to go ahead and open it up to Q&A. And do you have any thoughts on the 13, everybody starting with 13 tiles and starting with the joker? Francine did make a comment and she loves getting at least one joker. Francine, have you tested it out yet? I'm just curious. Francine said not yet. And Linda Long said, do you take the 4 jokers out of the wall before they are built? Who would like to answer that question on the panel?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So yeah, I mean, so the jokers, at least for the first game, could be taken out of the set and given to each player, and then you distribute the other 12 tiles. And I guess for the next game, you can keep the jokers in your rack and then reshuffle the rest. I guess that's the way it would work. If you play with an automatic table, then you might have to reprogram the table to be aware of the new count and keep the jokers separate. And if you have 2 colors of tiles for the automatic table, then you might have to have 2 separate sets. But yeah, you would just keep the jokers separate and then put them on your rack, and then distribute the rest.
Yep, and Randy and I do play on the auto table, and we do reprogram it when we have an event here for it. It just makes it a lot easier. So what, Julie, you had something?
I was just going to mention one extra point there, because obviously with 4 less tiles to build the walls, a lot of people might be thinking, well, how do we build the walls? So East would have 4 less tiles in their wall, so they'd have 2 rows of 17 tiles, and everybody else at the table would have 2 rows of 19.
Good point. Good point. Yes, as that was one of the questions I think that had come in through email, actually. Okay, now Grace is asking if it's hard, if doing a quint is harder now. That's a good question.
Well, do you want to answer that, Philippe? You look like you're going to.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
so I don't think it's harder, because so you start with a joker, then you still might get another one. But also keep in mind, and we've not talked about it, so maybe it's a little bit kind of, jumping the gun, but when we talk about amendments, you can upgrade a Kong to a quint, and so which is something you couldn't do before. So I think we'll actually probably maybe see more quints. You could start going for a quint, just exposing a Kong and hoping that you can upgrade it, and if not, then to another file, to another hand. So yeah, I think we'll still see quite a few quints, maybe more even.
Yeah, and also the reverse consecutive run. Although we don't know what 2024 will bring us on the card, but all new stuff. Okay, let's see. Okay, Linda had asked how many tiles in each wall, and I think you answered that already. So I think we've taken care of that. And let's see, David asked on YouTube, love it, East draws normally from the wall to start the game. Correct. Yes, so there is no more 14 tiles where East discards. So yes, you are correct, David, on that one. June says just looks very interesting. So that's was a comment on YouTube. And let's see what else we have here. And then we're going to go on to the next one. Would love to be able to get to all of these questions, but I know we're not going to have enough time. So let me see. How does this rule affect the distribution of tiles during the Charleston? Now, you mentioned that with the building of the walls and what's left too, right? It doesn't really, there's no, it's just the one wall is shorter. You want to, anybody have anything to add on that? It just doesn't really affect it.
No, I don't think it really affects it. You just distribute the tiles in the same way. I think the one thing that we haven't mentioned is that East is the dealer, so East is distributing the tiles to the other players. So that makes it, you know, they're just pushing out their wall, distributing, the next person pushes out, and East continues to distribute.
Right.
It's actually even a little simpler in the sense that since everybody starts with a joker, you just need to distribute 3 groups of 4, as opposed to having to do pick the first and the third, and you know, that is not necessary anymore. You just say 3 groups of 4 plus your starting joker. And
Plus your starting joker, correct? Yeah, and Kim says, out of curiosity, do the statistics show that East does better? And I'm assuming, Kim, you mean with 14 tiles as opposed to 13 tiles? You probably could answer that based on, maybe, I don't know. Can Julie or Philippe, can you answer to that?
Philippe, go ahead.
Yeah, so we did actually study that. We have a full article on our website on statistics. This is one of the things we looked at. But yes, East does have an advantage. I can't remember off the top of my head. The advantage with is something like 10 or 11%. By eliminating the 14th tile, it'll be interesting. We can remeasure again once we have enough data on MAHJ-X and see, is there still an advantage from the fact that you're the first person to play? But I don't think it'll be that much. I think the 14th tile is what really gave the biggest advantage.
Okay. And Kim also did add she loves starting with the joker, and I don't even need to ask Kim if she's already tested. They have tested, and they are their group is loving MAHJ-X. So, all right. Joanne is asking, how does everyone getting one joker, starting with the joker, reduce the luck factor? Wouldn't the lucky player still wind up with more jokers? John, what do you think about that one?
Well, we had a long debate, and it keeps coming up over and over again. Are there actually lucky players? You know, and you say, oh yeah, she always gets the joker. They're joker magnets or whatever, you know. And in trying to deal with changing that, you really can't. Luck is part of the game, you know, and luck is one of the reasons why the game is so popular, because every time you sit down and look at your hands, you have the hope inside that you could win, because luck could be on your side tonight, and you have to accept that luck can't always be on your side, and some days you're going to have strings of bad things happening. However, the way the game seems to be organized is that the joker has a really important role in the present version of the game. And so when we get into the more of the video and show some more of that, you'll see that having a joker in your hand allows you to do much more in this game than it does in the traditional game. And so we want to look at the role of jokers, because when jokers were introduced into the game, that's when luck really came in. You know, they've always been part of the game, and we love the game and we love being lucky, you know, but we also want to be more strategic.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the changes with the Charleston.
Another important change is that there are 2 mandatory Charlestons, but all left and right passes can be blind, and the across passes are negotiated like the optional pass. Here's why we think this benefits players. If a player needs to improve their hand, they can pass as many tiles as they need, up to 3 tiles. If a player has many tiles towards Mahjong, they can choose to pass fewer tiles. A mandatory second Charleston results in more opportunity for all players to strengthen their hand, whatever position they find themselves in after the first Charleston. This is the best of both worlds, where each player has the opportunity to maximize the benefits of the Charleston to progress their hand, without having to give up any tiles. Here's an example of this rule in action. Here's my rack at the end of the first Charleston. Consecutive run line 5A seems like an obvious choice. I pass the 7 crack, red and 8 dot on the second left, and receive a 4 bam, 3 dot and north. I now have only 2 tiles to pass in the second across. Ordinarily, 3 tiles would be passed, and I would have to give up a needed tile from my hand. In MAHJ-X, as the across pass is negotiated, I can choose to pass just 2 tiles, the 3 dot and north.
Who would like to talk about the changes in the Charleston?
Yeah, so the idea of the change for the Charleston is that both Charlestons are mandatory as opposed to being able to stop halfway. However, all left and right passes can be blind. So instead of being only the first left and the second right, both left and right can be blind. And all the cross passes are negotiated in a similar way that we do for the optional pass. So the idea behind that is that sometimes if we have a good hand, we would stop the Charleston because maybe we have fewer than 2 tiles to pass. And so we kind of miss the opportunity to progress our hands more, and we're preventing everybody else from progressing. If we don't have a good hand, then we do want the second Charleston. And so this is kind of like the best of both worlds, because you don't have to give up on anything, and you don't have to, and you also get a chance to progress your hand. The example we had in the video is like, let's say you're on the second across, and you've just received a tile you need, and you now have to pass 3. I think we've all been in that situation, and now you have to give up something you need, and it's really frustrating. And so here you don't have to. You say, well, I'll just pass 2. And so we're thinking this is like the best of both worlds, where it to the advantage of the player who is doing well or has already had a good hand, and the players who are not doing so well. Everybody gets to progress their hand as needed without having to sacrifice anything.
Excellent. And that's it does lead to certainly more opportunities to make hands. Like you said, it's just it's great opportunities during the Charleston. Kim says, love the Charleston, love it. And so you can't stop the Charleston is a question that just came in.
Say you're doing so well that you would have stopped the Charleston because you only have 2 tiles to pass, which ideally is the reason you would stop the Charleston, not because you can't decide between your hands. So if you only have 2 tiles to pass, then the Charleston continues. However, you could do a blind pass on your second left and do 2 across, and then do another blind pass. So in a way, you don't have to give up anything, and actually you might pick up another one that you wouldn't have picked up if you had stopped the Charleston. So even in that situation, it is still to the player's advantage.
Yeah, exactly. The video that I'm going to play is about the reverse joker swap.
Jokers play an important role in MAHJ-X, and there are several rules that increase its strategic use. The first one is the reverse joker swap, which means you can trade a joker for a tile in an exposure. This allows players needing a tile for a single or pair to obtain that tile by sacrificing a joker. This also allows the player to continue building their hand when it would otherwise have been considered dead. Jokers can also be used to prevent an opponent from achieving a jokerless hand. Here's an example. In this game, I am aiming for line 2 of the 2023 section of the card. I have quite a few tiles towards this hand. Unfortunately, I am missing my soap, and the player to my right has just exposed a pun of soaps. Since a soap has also been discarded, this hand would be unachievable in the standard American Mahjong game. Ordinarily, I would need to switch to another hand or play defensively. However, in MAHJ-X, I can announce that I'm swapping one of my jokers for a soap in my opponent's exposure. Now, I have my soap for the 2023 part of the hand. I can discard the green dragon, and I'm ready to win on a 2-bam, 3 dot, or joker.
All right, well, what are you guys thinking about that reverse joker exchange? See if we have any questions that will come up about that. Panel, have anything more that you want to add? Feel free.
Well, I can add that, in that exchange, now you've given another player a joker. Okay. They can use that joker in the same way that you just used it. So they could use it to swap, another tile and use it in their hand. They could also use the joker for some of the other ways that we've added that jokers can be used, but I think it's going to take a little bit of practice to pull this off in a regular way. And as Debbie said earlier, it's going to take a number of games to really get all the rules in your head and working together. But I think that the ability to do this swap, which is something that Gladys has wanted to do for a long time, changes the game in ways that, I think it makes it very interesting.
Yes, I agree 100% with that. Now, I do have a couple of questions that have come in. Nikki says, well, actually, it's a comment, jokers in hand might discourage someone from playing a singles and pairs hand. What do you think about that?
Because there are so many things you can do with jokers, having a joker in your hand doesn't mean it has to stay in your hand. It can be used for so many different things. So you can use that joker to swap it for a tile in somebody else's exposure. And this is probably coming up in something you're going to be showing later, Debbie. But but that means you get rid of the joker in your hand, but you acquire a tile that you need, or you can discard that joker and at the same time announce that you wish to pick up an extra tile from the wall, because you can do that if you're discarding a joker in MAHJ-X anyway. So you get an extra pick. So there are different uses for the joker, so you're not stuck with it if you're playing a singles and pairs hand. It can actually be very useful.
Excellent.
I agree. I think the way the rules are structured, you're more likely to see a singles and pairs hand because of that. Whereas before you would have been stuck waiting for a single tile or tile from a pair. Now with that joker gives you the power of potentially taking it from an exposure. So I think it will help with singles and pairs.
Yeah. And Deb made a comment saying that it seems like being able to do this reverse joker exchange might make the game easier. But there is so much strategy involved, not just in this rule, the jokers, but the others, that there's a lot of thinking that goes into each one of these to make everything come together. So it's not as easy as you would think.
Yeah, it does make it easier in a way. It's like that was one of the goals, is to remove some of the frustration. Where you're stuck and you're just waiting for a tile, and that's part of the element of luck. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting, hoping the tile comes, and there's nothing you can do.
Right.
Whereas in MAHJ-X, you have more opportunity, where before you would have been stuck, now you're not stuck. So from that perspective, it is easier. However, because there's all this possibility, you really have to pay attention, and so it is easier to not get stuck and therefore get mahjong, but it is more difficult in the sense that you have more things to think about. So it's more of a brain challenge.
Yeah, we definitely, there's parts of it that definitely are easier, and then parts that you really have to think about. But when you put everything together, it's quite interesting, right? Okay, now we have, as rules are refined, are amendments going to be available rather than having to print all the rules again? Connie asked that. Now, as we refine and amend rules, we'll definitely make them available. They'll be up on the Facebook group, on our website and all that, right?
So what I'll add there is that we will be having a larger kind of rule book coming out in the not too distant future. So that's going to have much more detail than the current rule summary that we have. So that shouldn't be too long before that's published. And then as rules are changed, we can, as you say, just show where they have changed, like which parts have been amended.
Yes. Now, David, watching from Zoom, says, when I do a joker exchange, do I have to expose, or do I just place the regular tile in my rack? But just like any other joker exchange. So the only time you're going to do an exposure is when you call a tile like you do in the traditional game and you expose. So it's no change in that regard. All right, let's see one more and then we're going to go on to, oh, okay. Yeah, there's more questions coming on. I think some of the participants that came in later. So if I don't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to us through we'll have all of the connections, the ways to connect in the show notes. Please feel free to reach out to us and ask, because unfortunately, we're not going to get to everybody's question. I'm going to do one more and go to the next video. Beth said, even the singles and pairs are concealed. You can swap your joker for a tile from another exposure and put that tile into your hand. Yes, exactly. And Sandy, the address of the website will also be in the show notes, and we'll have all of that covered for you. Let's get to the next rule. Okay, so this one is discarding a joker gets you another pick.
Interesting joker-related rule is that discarding a joker gets player another pick from the wall. This opens up strategic possibilities. Do I discard my joker to get another pick, or do I hold on to it to potentially swap for a tile in another player's exposure? Or should I use it to prevent another player's hand from being jokerless, or keep it as a safe discard at the end of the game? A joker can also be discarded towards the end of the game to reduce the number of picks other players receive.
That's a good one. I love that one. John?
I think it's interesting because the reason that I particularly like this rule is what can happen at near the end of the game. So sometimes you're in a situation where you have the MAHJ tile and you're really stuck, or you're really, really close, you're one away, and you have this joker in your hand, and you can then at that point, maybe you have 2 or 3 jokers in your hand, and you could just consistently discard and get another pick, discard another pick. So having a joker, you're always in a situation where you're trying to figure out, how can I use this joker? Do I do it this way or that way or whatever? So what's ironic is that the joker is the luck factor in the game. However, it's now the strategy factor in the game, because you can use that joker in so many different ways that you couldn't before. So that's why I like that one.
Yeah, there's just some great strategy with the jokers. Okay, any questions about that video in the use of jokers? Okay, I think everybody probably got that one. And amending in exposure is the next one up.
The next important rule change is the ability to update exposures. In other words, you can add or remove tiles from an existing exposure. This can be used as a strategic move by the player to switch between hands or to confuse opponents regarding a player's intended hand. For example, a player calls a discard and exposes a pung and later amends to a Kong. Additionally, this rule enables players to call a discard when they do not possess all the tiles required for a particular grouping, with the intent to amend the exposure later in the game. For example, let's say the player only has enough tiles in their hand to call for a Kong. They expose a Kong and then, during a later turn, adds a joker to make the quint they require. Here's an example of adding tiles to an exposure. Here, I am working towards Winds and Dragons, line 1B. I have exposed a pung of Norths and have quite a few wind tiles towards this hand. However, I now have an extra south that I don't need, and I'm struggling to get enough easts and wests. I receive another north from the wall. Ordinarily, exposures cannot be amended once a player has discarded. In MAHJ-X, I can announce that I am amending my exposure, changing my pung to a Kong. I will use the north, but a joker could also be used for this purpose. I've switched to playing Winds and Dragons, line 1A. I am now 2 tiles closer to Mahjong than I would have been. I can discard the 2 crack or the green, and I'm ready to call an east or a west for a pung. Here's another example of editing exposures. I am playing 2, 4, 6, 8, line 1. I have a Kong of 2 cracks exposed and several additional tiles towards this hand. As the game progresses, I am struggling to collect more flowers. I have also received more 4 cracks and 6 cracks, which I can't use. Since MAHJ-X allows me to amend exposures, I can announce that I am changing my exposed Kong of 2 cracks to a Pung. I have now switched to playing 2468, line 3A. As you can see, I am now much closer to Mahjong and can discard the flower, south, or 2 crack. I'm ready to call a 4 crack, 6 crack, or 8 crack.
Okay, that's a fun one. A lot of brain power needed in that too. All right, any questions about that? Let's see, we did have some questions earlier. So let me see. Francine said, since you can amend exposures, can a hand ever be called dead? Well, that's a very good question, because you can amend exposures, but the exposures that are on your rack still must be for a valid hand. So
Right.
you definitely have to use a lot more thinking, because you can't just put up any exposure in a hand that doesn't make sense. So it definitely requires a little bit more thinking. Anybody want to add to that?
I was going to
I
say
do.
it's, oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
One of the things that is important to consider is whenever you're doing a joker exchange or changing your exposures or doing anything where the tiles are moved around, you need to announce to the group that you're doing that. You know, in a traditional game, if I'm going to exchange a joker in my own hand, you know, people tend to like, well, you don't have to do that, because if you tell everybody, then, you know, they'll know what you're doing. So you could just quietly make that exchange, because that's to your advantage. Here, you have to tell the group, I'm doing this and I'm doing that every time. And that's a new habit that I think we have to get into, because otherwise you can't just be moving tiles around and nobody's noticing it, you know, or they're busy, that kind of thing. You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point, John. Julie, did you have some more to?
I can't remember what it was now. It'll come back to me in a moment, I'm sure.
Okay, no problem at all. All right, now Julie asked a very good question. Judy, said, can you subtract from an exposure from a Pung or a Kong to make it a pair? Well,
I mean, should I answer that? Yep.
yeah, sure, go right ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the answer is no, because we said the exposure has to be valid, and the pair is not a valid exposure.
Because it's being changed in the middle of your turn, you could change it, and then you couldn't change it to a pair because it has to be valid. It's still got to be valid on your rack at that point in time. So it would never be able to be changed to a pair. So it's between a Pung and a quint only.
Right. That's what it.
And those have to be valid. Again, like the example, the typical example, like let's say I want a Kong of flowers, I could not expose a Pung of flowers, expecting to turn it into a Kong later, because at least on this year's card there isn't.
Right.
So that's probably a good example where you could not apply that rule, because that one exposure would be invalid at that point.
Yeah. Okay, good point. Randy actually had made the same comment about, can you remove the joker? But we've got that answer now. Instead, Marcy says, Beth says, instead of adding to an exposure right away, wouldn't it be more strategic to do it when you can call Mahjong? Certainly one of the options.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the many options of that. Yeah.
As long as you have the tiles that you need to do that. If you've got more than one exposure up, you need more than, you know, one joker potentially, or whatever it is that you need to do that. And yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely gives a lot more flexibility to making hands, but uses more brain power for sure. Okay, let's see. So Marcy says, so since it must be a valid exposure, you can't use a Pung to bamboozle your opponent and then later add the missing tile to make a Kong. Only if, and that's one of the great things about doing this, if it's a valid tile and there's not more than one exposure up, or even if you have two exposures up and they still work with a current hand, you could throw somebody off with what you're doing by putting up a pung instead of a kong.
Yep.
Just have to make sure you plan it right.
Yeah, it's one of the great strategy points, right? Is that you can't try to fool people into believing you're doing something and then change it later. Even if you do have that fourth tile, you maybe don't use it yet and save it for later to throw people off.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so can you call a tile to modify an exposure? Just like in the traditional game, if you call a tile, you must pick it up and make a new exposure. No change in that rule from the traditional. Okay.
Yeah, so the exposure amendment is more akin to a joker swap, where you can't call a tile for the intent of doing a joker swap. It has first to be your turn, and then you can do a joker swap. So it's kind of like the same with the amendment. It has to first be your turn, so you can call a tile for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And as John said, it has to be announced kind of in the same way as a joker
That's
swap. So and also the reverse joker swap has to be announced too.
Yeah.
Otherwise there
Now,
will be penalties.
Philippe, I just would like you to address this one question, then we're going to go to the next video. Judy had said you should be able to subtract from a pung to go to a pair for mahjong. But can you explain it again, what the reasoning is behind that not being able to be done? Or Julie?
Because this is like a joker swaps aren't something that begins your turn or ends your turn. It's in the middle of your turn. So it has to take place at that time, kind of in the middle of your turn. So you can't have a pair on your rack in the middle of your turn before you call mahjong. So that's why it wouldn't be possible.
Okay, so hopefully that answers
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out for a response. So this
The last rule we'll discuss is the reverse consecutive run. For hands that include consecutive numbers, runs can be constructed with numbers in descending order, still following the tile pattern listed on the card. This applies to all hands in the consecutive run section, as well as any hand marked with any consecutive numbers, any run, etc. This gives players additional hand opportunities, though it requires more brain power. Also, this allows switching between hands based on tiles received or tiles no longer available. Here's an example of this rule being put to good use. In this example, I am playing the second line in consecutive run. 3, 4, 5, 6 in cracks. As the game progresses, I pick up another 3 crack and 5 crack. Since I already have my punts of 3 cracks and 5 cracks, I would not be able to use these tiles. I am also behind on my 4s and 6s. I only have 2 and need 4 of each. As I'm playing MAHJ-X, I decide to reverse the run 6, 5, 4, 3. I am now 2 tiles closer to mahjong. I discard the 8 dot or 1 bam and can call discards for the 6 cracks and 4 cracks.
Now that's a fun one. That one probably requires the most thinking and planning, but it definitely can give you so many more opportunities to make hands. Okay, what happens when somebody calls your hand dead, but you know it isn't? Those really would be similar rules to how we handle dead hand situations in a traditional game. So somebody calls your hand dead and you have to take care of that at the end and decide. So, or are we doing it differently because of the tournament rule based on scoring? That's a good question. Maybe we could discuss that after, because I think I have another thought about that. Okay, so for now, we'll definitely get back to you with anything we don't answer and clear up tonight. So let's see, what do we have? Grace says reverse consecutive run is the best. Grace has already been diving quite a bit into MAHJ-X and really loving it. What run hands cannot be reversed? That question's coming in from Randy.
I don't think there's any. I mean, it's a trick question, but I think any run. I mean, the example that we gave is just a consecutive run section, but you can think also about the mini run in the Winds and Dragons, right? When you have pair Kong. If you want to do, let's say 2-3-4, now you could do 4-3-2, right? And let's say you had more of this tile and less of the other one, you could do your run in reverse. So it's anything marked, is it either in the consecutive run section or marked as any run or any consecutive number or any something like that in the notes.
Right. And one of the things that you have to wrap your brain around is that the pattern has to stay the same. So it really takes some thinking to get that to happen. For instance, when you think of the quint, the consecutive run in the quint section, that's not easy to take and reverse it, because you want to think in terms of, oh, we just reverse it but keep the same grouping currently. But you have to keep the same exact configuration. So instead of 1 through 5, you'd have to say 5 would be the single. So if 1, right? So I'm not looking at my card, but
yes,
you know what I'm getting at.
In the quint, yeah, it starts at 2 to 5.
Yeah, 2 through 5. So you would have
5 through 2.
Right, and the 5 would have to be the same grouping as the 2 was.
Yeah, so a pair of 5s.
Exactly.
The other thing I would add is, like, when there's a run, it says also these numbers only. That still applies. Like in your example of the quint, says these numbers only, so that's still true whether you do it ascending or descending, or even the first one in consecutive run. It's still these numbers only. You can just do it backwards, which for this year probably doesn't matter because it's a symmetrical pattern. But in some years, sometimes it's pair, pong, pong, Kong. In this case, it would matter.
Judy, you cannot reverse evens. Only consecutive runs can be done in reverse order. So that's answering Judy's questions about, can you actually reverse a 2, 4, 6, 8 hand? Then Beth says, if the run is 3, 4, 5, 6, and that is pung, kong, it is really a reversal if you do kung, pung. Okay, so
the pattern would stay the same, right? So maybe I missed the question, but I think the question was, like, if it is pung kong, it is still pung kong, but your first number is your highest number, and then it goes down from that, which is the example we had in the video.
Right. So if you have more tiles in, like you currently have a pung of, let's say it's 3, like the example you give, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the 6 is the Kong currently, but you have more 3s than you do 6s, and you reverse it, then you can take advantage of having the 3 be in the Kong position. Hope that explains that one. Okay.
And if you have jokers, you may not have to make that decision. You could kind of keep that floating until later, right? So because your jokers could be used one way or the other, so you could decide to reverse or not reverse. It gets interesting.
Can I add something here also? These are the kinds of conversations we've been having with one another for the past year.
Time.
And they result in like really thoughtful rules coming out. And every now and then we have an epiphany and we get, oh yeah, this will work. Let's try this or whatever. And so, I'm really grateful to have, the caliber of people who take this game and make it run, so I hope you'll join us in the conversation, on the Facebook group and any way that you can, because we really like this stuff.
Yeah, we really do.
We really do.
Yeah, and we're here and we're pretty transparent, so you can find us. You have any questions, we're watching the Facebook group all the time to be able to bring you answers as quickly as possible. You can email us if you don't want to post it on the Facebook group. If you want to do it, a little bit more privately, that is fine too. We're here to help and help everybody have fun. All right, so Carol did say, can you reverse east, west, 1, 2, 3? And Carol, that might have been a delay because you're on YouTube, because we did mention, yes, that can be reversed. Absolutely. Now, I did have a question that came in that I think is important to address. The closed, Nikki is asking about the concealed year hands, the bottom hands. Can it be reversed because we've got a 2 and a 3 of consecutive numbers, but that's not really a consecutive run. That's a separate category in the year hands. So I can see where that can be a little confusing, but keep in mind that when we change to 2024, the 2 and 4s will not be in a consecutive number. Maybe that can help explain that a little bit.
And also in that section, it's like those numbers only, so they can't be changed like, the any run type numbers.
All right, I think any more questions? And panel, anything else that you want to add?
I think there was a question earlier about lost opportunities in the scoring part.
Maybe we should touch on scoring quickly.
Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So somebody, I don't know what their full question was, but it was something about a lost opportunity. So I think, there are penalties that we have. So there's a penalty for looking at the blind pass and for picking out a turn, and for taking tiles to the wrong end of the wall, etc. These are all like -10 penalty points. But there's also lost opportunity points. So for example, let's say I want to do a reverse joker swap, but I don't announce it, and I just go ahead and start it. Well, I lose that opportunity. I'm told that I have to put my tile back and I can't do it on that turn. And so you're not getting a point penalty for that. So anything that needs to be announced beforehand and you don't announce it, you actually lose the opportunity for doing it.
And the penalty in a way is the fact that if you've done that, you've kind of revealed part of your hand. Yes. And so maybe it's kind of an informal penalty. But one thing I want to mention, we didn't actually describe it. We talk about penalty. But the way the scoring is, it's closer to what a tournament does in the sense that you get points for the hand and you get bonuses in terms of points. You don't double the money or whatever. And the penalties for throwing the winning tiles are also closer to a tournament. So you get a tally of points rather than cents and being doubled at the end of each game. And so at the end of the whole session, the whole tally is made, and then whoever has the most points wins. So it's kind of like a mini golf.
And one of the things we also discussed is that some people like to play for money and some people don't. So if you're in a group that doesn't like to play for money, you might go to the scoring because that gives you some kind of feedback on what kind of day you had or whatever, or sometimes some groups do, they keep running scores and then they donate, money out of that. Like if there's a wall game, they'll put that in and they'll do some charity work on that. But the scoring's optional. You don't have to do it, but we think it's a good indicator of where you are. It also, there's a tournament end to this that we're still working on, that the rules for this game in a tournament are the same. And eventually when tournaments become, if we have enough MAHJ-X players to have tournaments, we'll be ready for that.
And if you do play for money, you can turn your points into money at the end if you want, and say, each point is 1 cent or whatever value you want to assign to it. And so instead of exchanging coins on each game, you just do it in one go at the end, which becomes out the same, but it's a little bit easier to manage.
So there's one thing that I wanted to mention that is different from the traditional game, and that's that in MAHJ-X there's no bonus for a self-picked hand.
Right.
But there is a bonus for playing an open hand without exposures.
Yes.
Because that's so the reasoning is that the self-pick is really a luck factor, right? You picked it yourself. There's no skill involved. Whereas being able to complete a hand without any exposure, that does require some skill. So that's what we wanted to recognize that and give
10 points for that.
a bonus for that.
Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah. And can one of you explain the benefits and the reasoning behind a score, the score pad, the score sheet, rather than how we traditionally play, which is paying out after each hand?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot more penalties involved, and we didn't cover everything, but there are penalties similar to what a tournament would do. There are penalties for like a blind pass. We mentioned that earlier, where you lose 10 points, and there's other penalties along the way. So it gets harder to track if you don't write it down. So it's just an easy way to track where you are. Like I said, if you want to turn the point into money at the end, it's just having a sheet and remembering this person is plus 25, minus 10, minus 10, plus 10. I mean, it's easy to get lost in that. So it's just an easy way to write it down and track of it.
Okay, very good. I do want to back up on a question that was asked earlier, I think is important. Can you remove, June asked, can you remove 2 tiles in an exposure? And I'm assuming she means during the same turn.
Exposure amendment, certainly, either from the same exposure or from 2 different ones. You can amend 2 exposures during the same turn. So yes, you can go from a quint to a pung if you wish. And then if you've got another exposure up there and you want to take that to a Kong, you can. And then you finish your exposure amendment and then you discard.
Absolutely. And don't forget, you need to announce it every time you're going to make an amendment. You can't just go at it, right? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And Linda wants to know if the penalties are in the group file. And yes, right now we have all of the files linked. I think on the Facebook group, they're on one, they're all linked individually, right? And they take you to the website. Is that correct?
Yes, they do. So everything is on the website. So you can either go to the links in the Facebook group file section, or just go directly to the website and everything is there. The summary rules, a score sheet, examples, the full video that Debbie has been playing parts of today is there. Pretty much everything that you could possibly need is there on the website, MAHJ-X.com.
And Randy wants to know if you can put a joker back in your hand by changing an exposure.
Most definitely.
Why not?
Get to use it all over again, Randy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And, you know, just doing all this, if you think about it, you're going to confuse your opponents even more.
And then you confuse yourself as well, potentially.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the problem. Well, and especially when you start combining, that's what Julie was saying earlier. The real power comes when you've mastered each role individually enough that you can start, layering them on top of each other. That you can combine maybe a reverse joker swap, and then use that to amend an exposure all in one go. And so, remember, these things are designed to work together. That requires double the brain power, but it also is probably, double the possibilities and double the fun.
Yeah, because Kim said, can you re-amend an exposure?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably here that we should say that, somebody starting to learn Mahjong for the first time probably shouldn't start with MAHJ-X. You probably should start with the National Mahjong League version first, and then kind of progress. Otherwise, you might get yourself very confused.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that leads me to the next question that came in. Allison said, have you discussed how this will affect your play if you play in tournaments? I'm concerned it will confuse me if I start to learn how to play this way. Will you have tournaments? Most definitely it could be confusing. So, this is not for somebody who's just starting to play in tournaments or just starting to play Mahjong. You need to really have all of the standard traditional version down pat, playing, and so that you can easily switch over. I often compare this to some of the games, the card games that are played locally, where there's different versions of it. And you literally, when you walk in the person's house, you have to take off this hat and put on another hat because, we can't do that in this version, but we were able to do it in the other version. It's going to be no different with MAHJ-X.
Yeah, or even playing Chinese or Rishi or any of the
Yeah,
other
any of the other
versions.
versions. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that people who struggle maybe with the new rules, it is a lot to absorb, right? And maybe just kind of add one at a time, and don't try to do everything all at once if you can't handle it. So I would say every rule has value. Don't reject any of them outright. Give everything a chance. But if you're struggling with mastering them all and thinking of them all at the same time, just kind of introduce them slowly, one at a time. Nothing says you have to use all the rules, and actually nothing says that you have to use any rules. And if you have a game that's going well with traditional without using any of the MAHJ-X special rules, then that's fine. You can play with that. But for people who we're playing in terms of the tournament, yeah, we will have probably MAHJ-X tournaments at some point. And of course, if you enter that tournament, the expectation is that you've played it enough that you're comfortable playing with those rules.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and we want feedback. It would be amazing if this iteration is the only one that we're talking about. So your feedback will be greatly appreciated, and hopefully help us even improve things more. Judy did mention, I think she had mentioned earlier about the score sheet. During the game, a player could put the penalty into a game pot. Would have to be game pots for every player, right?
Yes, I mean the game pots. You could tally point. Yeah, you have to have one pot for each player, and when you win, you take from that pot. When you have a penalty, you put in that pot. I suppose you could do it that way. It seems harder, but maybe.
And then Grace said, "What's the rationale for East to deal the tiles, streamlining it, avoiding the possibility of a misdeal?"
It's like a game of cards, I
Just
guess.
like
There's
in
always
cards.
a dealer in a game of cards.
We're fashioned it off of card games, right? Kim said, "Thank you for all your hard work. You are very, very welcome." And Linda said, "Thank you to all the panel for your expertise and time. You are so very welcome." It's been great spending the evening with everybody. Some very thoughtful questions posed to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to connecting with you on the MAHJ-X Facebook group. If you haven't joined already, please head over there and join the group. Join us on the Instagram page. Make sure you visit our website because there's a lot of great things there for you to find. FAQs and more. We're just going to be adding more stuff to it as time goes on. And you want to email us, feel free to email us at info@mahjx.com. All of these links will be in the show notes when it is uploaded to YouTube. Any final words from the panel? If not, we're going to call it a wrap.
That's great,
Thanks for
Debbie.
coming.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. And dive into MAHJ-X.
Please do.
Yes, please do.
And don't forget to subscribe to the MAHJ-X YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up and click the bell so you get notifications.